So local file inclusion is really good because it allows us to read files in the server, and we might be able to read files with passwords or sensitive information. What will be really great is if we can actually gain full access or full control over the target server using local file inclusion vulnerabilities. So in this lecture, we'll see how we can get a reverse shell by exploiting the local file inclusion vulnerability that we've seen in the previous lecture. So because they allow us to read files on the server, so if we manage to write anything on that server, then we can write some malicious code and then browse it and get that code to be executed. So this is exactly what we're going to try to do. There's a number of methods to achieve that. So usually it's done using the log files, because the log files usually register or write stuff that happens on the server. So you can try to log in with a username, but instead of putting a username, you put a PHP code, or you can try to send an email, and then instead of the email, put a PHP code, and then try to browse these log files, and the PHP code will be executed. The first method that we're going to have a look on, though, it's going to exploit the environment variable. So this is basically a file that contains an array of information about the current environment. So let's just have an example of this quickly. So right here, I am on my Kali machine. I'm not hacking anything. I'm not on any server. And I'm just going to see what's the content of that file. So this file exists in all Linux operating systems. So I'm just going to open that file right now using the cat command. And as you can see, you'll see a number of environment variables that are related to the current environment. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to open this file here in my browser instead of the etc password. So it's going to be in proc self environ. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. And as you can see, again, we can see an array of variables about the current environment. What's interesting here is this variable. So we can see that the user agent is being sent and it's being displayed right here. Now the user agent basically is the current browser used by the user. So you can see that because I'm using Firefox, the website thinks that I'm using Firefox, which is correct. And that's because Firefox, every time you open a website, it actually tells that website what browser it is. So this happens on all websites. So we can see that Firefox is telling the website or the web browser that I'm Firefox 5 and it's running on Linux, whatever. So this is actually sent from the client. So we can actually modify this value. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to modify the user agent value, and we're going to place code that will give us reverse shell. Before we do that, let's make sure that the code will be executed on the server. So we're going to send just a normal PHP code that will display PHP information. So I'm going to turn on my interceptor. Now, I showed you how to set up burp proxy. So if you don't know how to do that, go back to that lecture and see how you can set up burp proxy. So I just turned on the interceptor and I'm going to browse the exact same URL. And right here, if we go on the headers, you'll see that Firefox is sending the user agent right here, and it's sending it as Mozilla 5 and then Linux, whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify this value and we're going to put PHP code. And the code I'm going to put is very simple. It'll basically just display the PHP information. So it's a function called PHP info. And then I'm going to forward this packet. And as you can see, the PHP code got executed on the website, on the target website. This means if we send malicious code to this website, we'll actually be able to gain full access, or we can get our code to be executed. Now you can literally send any PHP code you want. You can send code to list files, you can send code to upload a file, or you can send one of the codes that we used before to gain a reverse connection. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the exact same code that we used before in the previous lectures to gain full control over the target computer. So I'm actually just going to type it down here in terminal and then I'm going to copy it. So we're going to be using pass-through, and we're using netcat. And then I'm going to put my IP address. And I'm going to use the port, which is in this attack, I'm going to use 8888. And then we put the semicolon. So it's the same, it's just a PHP function. We use that in the code execution lecture. So I'm literally just going to copy this and I'm going to inject it as the user agent. Now, before I do that, I'm going to listen on port 8888 for connections. So we're going to use the same code that we used before again with netcat. And now we're listening for connections. We have our interceptor on. I'm going to browse the website. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to modify the user agent. Again, don't forget to put the question marks here because I only put the code there. So we have the opening and the closing for PHP. And then we put our code, which is the pass-through code, NCE, bin sh, our IP, followed by the port that we're listening on. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to forward. And as you can see, we got a connection back using the local file inclusion vulnerability. Now I can browse files. I can do pwd, I can do ls, I can do id, and I can pretty much do anything I want on the server now that I have full shell access. So we were able to convert a local file inclusion vulnerability that can only show you files or can only allow you to read files on the server. We were able to convert that and exploit it to get full access to the target server. All is that possible because we were able to write to the proc self environ variable, which displays our user agent. And by changing the user agent to our PHP code, we were able to run any PHP code that we want.